Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. I'm so delighted to have some of my very favorite law enforcement professionals to guide us through this very fraught time. Dr. Jonni Redick, retired Assistant Chief of the California Highway Patrol. Dr. Obed Magny, former police officer and Chief Executive Officer of Magny Leadership, and Tiffany Martin, former Special Agent of the FBI and CEO of TKMartin Consulting. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your guidance because this is such a fraught time of how do you maintain public safety? How do you express your distress in terms of what is going on in this country? Various people with various positions need to be able to protest and express and have an impact on civil society, but we want to keep everybody safe. Let's just go around the room and let's talk a little bit about how we think about safety and about the role of law enforcement in today's modern society where everybody can actually be treated or should be treated in an equal way under the law. Jonni, do you want to start us off and just sort of give us your sense of where we are as a people and how different members of the law enforcement community view this very fraught time?
Well, Mark, first of all, thank you for having me and having all of us to be able to have the conversation around this, because a lot of people are spending time in silos, trying to figure out how to feel, what to say to other people who may be having different opinions than they do, not just in, the space of protesting, but just in our everyday lives, right? We're coming across people who have different perspectives. And so how do we try to have a civil engagement or a discussion? So when you move it to law enforcement, to me, it's kind of connected, but also going to be very separate as we talk about. So I think it's just really a very deeply, deeply emotional time. It's a very human experience for all of us. And we're all definitely uniquely different in this experience. And one of the things I was thinking about when I think about community members versus law enforcement is the idea that we have been given a duty to protect and serve and to stand in the way of chaos for others. But oftentimes, especially right now, we seem to be a part of the chaos in some spaces of the chaos, if that makes sense. It's like layered chaos, and we are caught in the middle of that. And I think the idea for us here is to not only inform your listeners and audience and people who are part of the community and public, but also to remind us who are still in the law enforcement profession. And I say that because I still am an educator for public safety and law enforcement leaders. I train, I consult, I speak nationally, is that we're all feeling the experience. And there is harm being done in different ways. And how do we reduce that? How do we de-escalate that? How do we continue to keep the legitimacy of the policing that we do, continue to build the trust with the community that we have, and to be able to really kind of lean in and create a space where we can start to have better dialogue, right? Versus everybody kind of polarizing and taking their sides. And so that's kind of where I'm going to be approaching this from today. And because I want to, how can we de-escalate? How can we be better informed? How can we collaborate and be partners between law enforcement and the communities that we serve? We don't have to be adversarial. And I think there's a way to be able to do that. And I think we're going to be able to kind of evolve that as we speak today.
How do you see what this moment in time, in a way that fosters communication and understanding amongst ourselves as law enforcement professionals, amongst ourselves as people who care about civil society, but then across those various boundaries?
Transformational leadership versus transactional leadership. And what we're seeing today is far too many organizations still subscribing to the transactional leadership form of relationship building, and it just doesn't work. The research says that it doesn't work. We know that in real life, it doesn't work. Maybe in some instances where there's an active shooter or critical incident where you're trying to bring a resolve right away, that makes sense. But like in any relationship, you've got to be proactive on the front end. You don't wait until everything collapses and start looking around and saying, hey, how do we fix this problem? How did we get here? If you think about the relationship between community members and the police, this is not a them over there and the police are over here. We don't do that with any other organization, right? We don't talk about the medical community like that. We don't talk about the fire department that way. We don't talk about even clergy. We don't say the church is over there and then the community is over there. It's always synonymous with everybody's working together. Everyone plays a different role, obviously, but it's for a common purpose. And unfortunately, in this country, we do have an ugly history when it comes to policing, and particularly, the Black community. We're not going to fix this problem by continuing what we're doing right now. As you know, I'm a big supporter of emotional intelligence training. I know that working with Tiffany and with Jonni, we all speak the same language in that we don't wait until a crisis takes place in order to deal with the problem. We deal with it on the front end so that when the storm does come, everyone, not one particular group, not another particular group, everyone can get through that storm together. You're not going to have any sort of success anywhere, regardless whether we're talking about policing or any other industry, if there is no trust between the stakeholders and the communities that they serve. Literally, there is no other way that you're going to have a solution that everybody's going to have buy-in, where everyone's going to feel like they have an equal part in seeing this through. And this is why it's so important that when we have this conversation going forward, that we talk about that transformative leadership approach, where we're looking at it not just holistically, but proactively, so that when the crisis takes place, it's no longer everyone pointing fingers, it's everybody pulling their weight together to get through that crisis.
Tiffany, as a former special agent, do you see this combination of, there is the time where you just have to do the thing, but there's also the time when you have to think about how you do the thing when the time comes, right? Sort of before and after, and you deconstruct. And how do you see it?
Well, to be honest with you, Mark, I think anytime you do anything, you should be intentional in what is it you're trying to promote? What is your outcome? What's the why behind what you do? So whether you're talking about things in terms of transactional or transformational, there should always be an intent in what you do, what you say, how you execute should lead toward the outcomes that you are trying to promote and achieve. And just like Dr. Magny and Dr. Redick were saying, communication is key. That trust and that foundation isn't just every now and again. You have to build that infrastructure from the start. And when it's missing, you start to see that misalignment. You start to see the discord. You start to see the misunderstanding because the foundational exchange, that relationship wasn't in place. Just like Dr. Magny was saying, police and law enforcement should not be separate from their communities. They are part of the community. But if they're only present and they never have a true presence, or if that presence is only surrounded when there's trauma, when there's emergency, when there's urgency going on, then that starts to frame the relationship. So the relationship has to exist outside of the specific situation. It has to be foundational, and it has to be two-way, and it has to be intentional.
What should the role of law enforcement be in a healthy society? And what kind of relationships, Tiffany, should we all have with one another? The people who are benefiting from your work, and those people who are undertaking the work that you do. How do we make this a more healthy relationship?
I think having perspective and understanding that police officers have lives outside of the job, just like when you're engaging with someone through your law enforcement role, those people have lives and experiences outside of that engagement. And I think it's very easy to forget that life's on all of us. And I think when we engage in a relationship, whether it's with law enforcement, supervisors, family, I don't think anyone goes in expecting the worst out of the relationship. I think they go in wanting the best of that relationship, both what they give and get from it. And I think your engagement is an indicator of that. The words you use, when you're present, how you support or don't support. And I think when it comes to law enforcement, the roles around to protect and to serve is communal, but it's not always perceived that way based on what the experiences may be of the communities that those officers are a part of. And I think both sides have to come to the table understanding we're all people, we're all human. And when we engage in a way that's based on respect, trust, accountability, and information awareness, I think those lead to a solid foundation for starting relationships that can be collaborative, right? It's not one side versus the other. Community is collaborative. It's your village, and everyone should have a mindfulness and a respect for the role that each person plays and how they contribute. But the people who have the responsibility of those roles should also use those roles and contribute in a way that brings up the community. And I see that, and I feel that's a responsibility from both sides, whether it's a community relationship and collaboration or individual. How you show up is very important.
So I just wanted to take a step back, Mark. When we take in the dynamic of like what's happening today, and we haven't named it since we've been talking, what is happening today, right? And so it's not to me, for me to sit in the conversation and to create a polarizing political conversation. But what I want to say is, because of the administrative politics, both at the federal level and now affecting some of the different states at the state level, we are having a particular entity, ICE, who is coming into communities to make, in effect, arrests on those who have an immigration status that doesn't meet the criteria for whatever that may look like, because there's so many different varying possibilities on all of those things.
There are ambiguities.
Yeah, a lot of ambiguities. So for a local law enforcement and their partnering allied agencies, it makes it really complicated for them to continue to build trust in the community, which is what they do consistently through their community engagement, best practices. They all have these in place where they're working to build trust in the community, whether it's coffee with a cop, whether they go out and do town halls, whether they go out and do listening sessions. So they are doing the work in the community. When this particular dynamic is happening, it shakes everybody's kind of normalcy of how they've been operating, because when you're wearing a uniform, the public doesn't necessarily know the difference between federal and your local municipality on how you align for these affecting of these arrests. And so this is a great space for me that I think about as educating the community from a law enforcement perspective on what you are doing and not doing from your local perspective. But for us also, and you, is sharing with the community for them to be a part of the conversation, right? Law enforcement is always looking for community to be, and we don't want to come in too hot, right? Because everybody's emotional. But if we can come in with ideas, an open mind, and the communication like Tiffany was talking about that can be respectful, and we can give dignity to everybody in the moment, we might be able to problem solve and be able to help. Now, can we change a lot of things if they're legally taking place? Probably not. But what we can do is educate people what the process may look like. What could the expectations be? How can we go in and work together to figure out some other ways around to help people or to support them or to position them? But we can't just work off emotions and sitting being angry on both sides and not coming together, because your local law enforcement, and I'm going to say your county and your state, and most states, are trying to work together to be able to protect the citizens, to be able to continue to serve them with dignity and respect, and provide the resources that they should be able to have access to that are also being cut off. So I just want to say, I'm an advocate that law enforcement is working. Community needs to lean in, see what they're doing, and try to be a part of it.
You know, it's a really interesting set of points that you raised. What I think you're basically saying is that the work has actually been done by certain elements of law enforcement. And what's going on right now with ICE is that some of that work of community trust building is being abandoned, whether it's intentional or unintentional. And now we're all confronted with, as civilians, we don't necessarily make the distinction between different people wearing different uniforms. We don't know what their training is. There is trust that is being broken. If that's the situation that we are confronting right now, what is my role? What is our role in trying to get back to a better state? How do we actually function, Obed and Tiffany, in a way that we recognize that there's still work to do? What do I do today?
So it's funny you bring that up. About 5 years ago, I gave a specific training on this very exact subject, policing in immigrant communities. And this was in North Carolina. And the audience were predominantly, law enforcement executives. And to the point that you just made, I had to overemphasize that this is not a finite issue. This is not something that has a zenith or an end where, you just do a certain amount of training and then that's that. And one of the things that I mentioned was something you already brought up was, hey, especially in this particular space, there are some people who don't know the difference between county and city, or the different municipalities and so on and so forth. They just see a badge, they see a uniform, and for many of them, maybe they had some terrible experiences from where they originated from and so on and so forth. This is, again, I'm just gonna bring it back to the front, why it's so important that you are engaged and you know who your community members are. You might have an immigrant population from a certain country where cultural norms are going to be vastly different from the next. And you just can't assume that everybody knows the same thing about the same things. And so it's not one big monolithic group. Granted, you're talking about public safety, you're talking about a population that you're looking out for. But you also want to look at it holistically in the standpoint of if people are not coming to you to tell you what's going on in the communities, they're vulnerable. So now you've got crime statistics that are underreported. And that causes all kinds of problems. So, again, I just want to get to the front of this and say, when I talk about being proactive, when I say, hey, you've got to be engaged with the community, it can't be a passive, just talk to a couple of people here or talk to a couple of people there. You've got to be so entrenched, think of it as like a family, right? At Thanksgiving, we got some people we get along with. We got some family members we may not get along with. But everybody knows everybody, what their quirks are, what their triggers are, and so on and so forth. You've got to get to a level of community engagement where you know your community partners, who they are, where they come from, and so on and so forth. And the way you get better at that is that you are entrenched. You don't just do a once a year or a biannual event. This is something that you do weekly community meetings or bi-weekly meetings. Like, hey, what's going on? How can we be partners? How can we be, again, this is something that you nurture, you work on, no different than going to the gym.
Don't we, who are not in the law enforcement community, don't we also have to become educated more and have a greater appreciation of your lives?
And I appreciate that, Mark, because one thing that I think people could do, just as an individual person, is speak more positive things about your local experiences with your law enforcement members. For one, what we read on the headlines or we see in social media paints a picture across every single individual person in law enforcement who is going out there donning the uniform, whether they're the sworn or the professional staff there's so many classifications. One incident across this nation impacts everybody despite where you work. And what really matters to law enforcement is when they feel community support, when they feel that they're appreciated. Because I know I'm going to speak from my own personal experience that it's tough. It was tough to go out there and go to work every day because I had small children. I wanted to make sure that I came home safe, that I came home alive. So when we go out to work every day to do the work that we do, to help citizens in whatever situation they're in, and oftentimes it is their worst moment that they're having, that we're showing up most of the time. That when I did that with kindness. I did that with compassion. I did that with the technical competence that I had in my job. I did that with firmness and accountability if I had to make an arrest or if I had to use force. But I didn't do it because I went out there and I wanted to torment the public, or I wanted to be a type of officer that went out there and made the citizens fearful, which is what you see on the headlines so much, or how people are experiencing that. It doesn't take away from that maybe they have had an incident or a family member. But if you have not had the experience and you don't have any situation, allow yourself to be open-minded to go in on a proactive opportunity to go into your police department and just have a conversation. They have they have citizens academies, so you can learn all about the things that your local police department does. They have all kinds of different opportunities for you to meet and greet them. Right. But I believe just word of mouth. I mean, when we talk about recruitment for law enforcement, ads and stuff don't necessarily work. It's word of mouth. That's what brings people into the policing profession. And I believe we can change and shift minds and behavior if the citizens and public we serve show their support by just talking about it that way, sharing the good things that happen. Obed and Tiffany have been talking about relationship building. Relational policing is something that modern policing professionals are really trying to integrate into their DNA of how they go out and work, how their officers are to go out and meet and speak and talk to people as they're doing their job. Back in the 80s, I came on in the late 80s, in the early 90s, there wasn't a lot of relational policing. It was a war on drugs most of the time. And so you are out policing, period. You are trying to remove, criminals and crime off the streets. Well, there's a balance in crime reduction and through all those strategic planning that law enforcement agencies do, with this balance of community engagement, best practices, and relational policing.
The community doesn't always know those opportunities or how to reach. I can speak from personal experience. Until I became a sworn law enforcement officer, I had never done coffee with a cop or heard that there was a citizens academy that I could be a member of. So there has to be this willingness on both sides to, one, acknowledge what is missing and what's needed. And then you have to have a willingness, just like Dr. Redick was saying, you have to have a willingness and an openness to change the narrative. If I've never had an opportunity, or I'm sitting as a community member thinking, I don't know that I've had an opportunity to positively engage with my local law enforcement, then let's find one. Is there a community event that they're at? Is there a 5K or a fundraiser that's going on? And on the other side, as a sworn law enforcement officer, to say the same thing. Does this community only see me when there's an emergency and they're calling 911? Or do they see me at the local cafe hanging out? Do they see me at the basketball courts cheering on their kids or coaching a team, right? We have to recognize what these narratives are saying and how to overcome. We have to both sides have to self-advocate for what we need to create a better relationship and to have a better path. And you can only, sometimes you don't know what you don't know from both sides, right? So you have to be willing and open to seek out those opportunities that lead to that.
How do we, with empathy, try to bring people together and solve and leverage the goodness that's in people to get there, even if they come from different political views and different views? Dr. Obed, how do you do this? Because this is your job in part, right? I mean, this is what you do. You bring people together and you talk it out.
You reward the behavior that you want to see in your organization. So if you're, the police chief, or if you're a CEO, or if you're a director, or if you're in a leadership position, and notice I didn't say management position, I said leadership position. If you want to see the change that you're looking for, you've got to also reward it. One of the examples I like to use is if you ask the community, hey, what does success look like to you? What is it that you would like to see between the community and the police? You're going to get one answer. You'll probably hear stuff like, hey, being treated with respect, empathy, those type of things. If you ask a police organization, I'm not saying all of them are like this. I'm just saying this is an example. And their measure of success is how many tickets we wrote, how many people we took to jail, and so on and so forth. You got a huge gap in the middle. So if we want to bridge that gap, we start rewarding, whether it's recognition or what have you, the officers that do a lot of community engagement. If we reward the officers who are doing the enforcement, well, the message, not just to that one particular officer, but the message around the organization is, hey, if I want to get ahead, I got to do that heavy enforcement. Then that erodes that trust part, right? So if we reward, and again, I hate to use that word reward like it's a transactional thing. It's not. But the point is if the message is when we do right by the community and we make sure that's acknowledged, people get the message. That's how you start to build that community trust holistically and internally, that trust where officers who are doing the right things for the right reasons know that they're going to get ahead in the organization. And maybe those who are enforcement minded first, not so much. So that's one avenue to fix it.
That connects to Jonny's point, right? When Jonni said, war on drugs, right? It's all about statistics and about arrest. I guess part of this is about looking at the systems, right, Obed, in terms of how you actually manage people. And that actually has an impact on how people behave. Is that your experience as well, Tiffany?
Absolutely. I think Dr. Magny said it well. And I had a colleague, we were talking recently, and we said your organization and your values are reflected by what you tolerate and what you reward. I personally feel that the benefit of the doubt is something we've lost as a society. I feel like a lot of times growing up, the benefit of the doubt was offered. People were given grace. And I think when we're living in a very polarized situation or we're feeling something that's very close to us, it's very easy to assume bad intent or just to not give space for well-intended that just didn't execute well. And so I think when we engage with each other as communities, as individuals, going in with a mindset and a mindfulness around, okay, was this really meant to set me up and put me in a negative position? Or was this something that just maybe didn't quite execute or pan out the way it was intended? And I think having that grace with ourselves and with the people we deal with makes a difference in your willingness to change that narrative, your willingness to show up differently or to seek out additional information. And Dr. Magny is absolutely correct. And I know Dr. Redick can speak to leadership and the influence of how you show up as a leader impacts how your teams are going to take that and how it's reflective of values.
Something that strikes me is that you have tactics that are exercised that are meant to stop dialogue and stop communication, to create outrage. How do we overcome that? If we've got such blunt instruments being deployed, and we all in society feel threatened from whatever position we are, right? If you're an ICE person who is basically being measured on the number of arrests that you have, apprehensions that you have, right? And then you start to behave in that way, that in and of itself can stop dialogue. Is there a way, Jonni, that we can foster that dialogue not within a classroom context where people are coming to your classroom to actually have the dialogue, but just in our everyday walks of life? How do I work with people who have just arrested somebody where their kids are crying? It looks very violent and abrupt. The person doesn't look like they're a threat. how do I actually function within that situation? Do I do I step aside and just witness? What do I do? How would you want me to respond in that kind of situation? I know it's kind of an unfair question, but that's what we're all confronting, aren't we?
I just wanted clarity on, you said that there are tactics that block communication. I'm going to disagree that there are not tactics that we deploy in law enforcement that are intentionally intended to block communication. If a use of force has to be used because an order has been given to the individual or to the group or whatever that may be, or based on the aggressive nature or behavior of the person that you're in contact, then that escalates your continuum of use of force on what you will. You move from command presence to different levels of use of force. And so there's probably not going to be a lot of talking after a certain point, but there is a point where most law enforcement officers, and I can't speak to all of them because their tactics may not be good. And I can't speak to ICE because those tactics, and I'm not going to label all of ICE because there is a whole echelon of a new group that has come in, and you have agents that have been ICE agents for years and are also concerned about the practices that they're starting to witness and experience and have to be a part of. And most of us in law enforcement, a lot of these practices aren't tactically sound. They're not what we train. So we have standardized training protocols for most law enforcement agencies across this country. And these practices are to protect the citizens, to protect the officers, to reduce risk and harm and liability in order to keep order, right? And to get things done. So when you talk about things that block, we don't have that intentionally. Those are things that end up happening based on a situation that may occur. When you're talking about being somebody who's witnessing somebody who is being arrested or affected by law enforcement police contact, it depends on the situation. But the one thing that I would tell people to think about is it a very high emotionally intense situation in that moment? If so, a lot of times physiologically, tunnel vision is going to take place. Your emotions are going to override any kind of common sense judgment that you would normally make in your reasoning and decision making. But if you have an ability to run through scenarios and think about if this thing happens and what would I do and what would my response be, think about how you would want to pause and calm yourself down. You may not be able to calm that situation down because you cannot control anybody else, but you can possibly control your own emotions, which will then open up the aperture of what you're seeing versus closing on tunnel vision to be able to pick up all the things that are happening so that you might have a better response. And your best response in the moment may to maybe verbally say something, but not to escalate, and to maybe keep hands off, because the officers are going to be doing what they're doing. And then you're going to become a part of that. And then how good are you going to be to the overall situation? But just like law enforcement officers, we run through scenarios all the time. There's things that we haven't encountered, or if we do encounter it, like the protest is here, but what if the protest moves here and there's this and they start to, we run through scenarios all the time. What is the response going to be? How many people are you going to send? What are you going to do if you're over there around the corner by yourself? You know, all of these things, citizens can do the same thing, especially if they're active protesters. Like they are going out to the protest. They are going into the fray of where these things are happening. Be informed about your constitutional rights, but know the law of what you can and cannot do. Because just because somebody's doing that over there doesn't mean that's something that you can do. Know what you can do and not. And there's a lot of education from law enforcement for constitutional rights and protesting and protecting, because that's the balance. It is your right to go out and protest, but you have to do it lawfully, because if not, that's where it's no longer gray. It becomes law. We have legal statutes that be able to allow us to do the things that we do. And we don't want to create harm to anybody. We want everybody to go safely and go home safely on both sides.
Great. So what you were doing there, Jonni, just to be clear, is you were providing training to me as a non-law enforcement professional. It's a complement to the training that you all do to law enforcement professionals, right? And what the implication is that we, all of us as citizens, have a responsibility to understand this aspect of civil life, particularly when there's stress, right? And incidentally, by the way, just as a clarification, when I was talking about blocking communication, I wasn't actually referring to law enforcement blocking communication. I was referring to politicians basically blocking communication intentionally for their own purposes instead of allowing people to really create understanding. What they're trying to do is to drive to a certain conclusion, and non-communication amongst the actors is an expedient to doing that, right? So we all have to live in that.
Yeah, well, thank you for clarifying that. And that does happen. So this is one of the things that both Tiffany and Dr. Magny were talking about for good leadership. The executive leadership in law enforcement agencies and public safety agencies have to stay aware of what is relevant and current and contemporary happening at all levels of government that affect the work that they're doing in their particular jurisdiction. And they have to get ahead of the narrative. So if the federal government or the state government is blocking some type of communication and driving information a certain way, I, as a police chief, have complete autonomy to be able to at least go out and message to my community something that can reassure them, something that can provide some level of information. There could be confidential details I can't provide, but I can share the process. I can take questions. I can make myself available. I can become visible. We can create that transparency. And so in that transparency is where I get to also humanize the work that we're doing and appeal to the community who needs to know what's happening right here for me in my community. All this stuff that's going on in DC or whatever other state, what's it like for us? Can you reassure us? And they can do that well before there's something that's happening. But while they're reassuring and comforting and answering questions to the public, they have to do it internally for their people because they are just as uncertain, just as not sure. They've got to go home. They've got family members, maybe themselves. They're uncertain. So we have to build trust internally. And Dr. Magny said it, how we lead, we have to lead our people. Tiffany mentioned how you show up for your people is how they're going to model how they show up for someone like you, Mark, when they come across you out in the public. So there's lots of layers, but there's lots of possibilities.
I love that point of even if you're operating under constraints of the organization of which you are a part, there are things that you can do, right? There's communication you can have. You can try and make it a little bit better. Tiffany, what is your prescription of how we should function in these times to make things better and generate more light than heat?
I think just what you said with the intention of generating more light, it's really easy to get caught up in the emotional feel of things, especially when it's very close to home, regardless of what community you're representing. And I think that intentionality is key. I think openness to learning. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know, and that openness to learning and being willing to exchange ideas in a very constructive and informational way. And I think collaboration. I think we all are part of the village, but we have to recognize that and be willing to support each other as a village when we move forward. But having that open dialogue and communication, that voice of self-advocacy, whether you are showing up as a protester or as law enforcement, saying what you need and seeking out valid and trustworthy sources to provide you with that. And I think grace, I think that's huge. I think going into these situations, understanding it's more than just two groups showing up in one place. There's a lot of nuances, as everyone has spoken to. There are a lot of layers to it, but we can all be positive contributors to more light than heat if that is what we choose to do.
Being intentional knowing that this is a verb, not a noun. There is no destination in this process. I want to make sure I clearly articulate that. There is no, hey, once we get to this specific level, everything is perfect and everything is fine. This is an ongoing process. It will always be an ongoing process. 500 years from now, it will continue to be an ongoing process. So to Tiffany's point, to Jonny's point, you have to be intentional. You have to come with respect. Emotions are always going to be a part of it, but within the guardrails of understanding each other and understanding each sides, each perspectives, and with the intentionality of moving forward, how do we do that constructively? And it's going to look different in every community. All right. Detroit's going to have different issues than what's going on in Palm Beach, which is going to be different from what's going on in Sacramento, which is going to be different from Seattle, which is going to be different from what's going on in rural Arkansas. So being engaged, being intentional with your respective communities, that's how it starts. You continue moving forward and understanding that there is no end game. This is a continuous process.
I'm going to take away from your lessons to me a few things. I'm going to take away this idea of empathy for somebody else's life. I'm going to take away the idea of calming yourself in stressful situations. And I'm going to take away the idea of maybe absorbing some pain that is unjust, but not tolerating the injustice. Right, absorbing pain, but not tolerating the injustice and persevering, based on the values that we want to have promulgated in this country. I think that you've made all those points. I'm going to take away those lessons. And I'd like to thank you for that, Dr. Jonni Redick, retired Assistant Chief of the California Highway Patrol, Dr. Obed Magny, former police officer and Chief Executive Officer of Magny Leadership, and Tiffany Martins, former special agent of the FBI and CEO of TKMartin Consulting. Thank you so much for sharing your insights into this dialogue. Thank you so much for educating me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having us.